Elon Musk Chapter 30, The Fourth Launch. August, September, August to September 2008. Founders to the rescue. Musk had budgeted for 3 launch attempts of the Falcon 1, and all had exploded before they could get to orbit. Facing personal bankruptcy and with Tesla in a financial crisis, it was hard to see how he was going to raise money for a 4th attempt. Then a surprising group came to the rescue. His fellow co-founders of PayPal, who had ejected him from the role of CEO 8 years earlier. Musk had taken his ouster with unusual calm, and he stayed friendly with the coup leaders, including Peter Thiel and Max Levchin. The old PayPal Mafia, as they called themselves, were a tight-knit crowd. They helped finance their former colleague, David Sachs, the friend who took notes for Antonio Gracias in a law school. When he pronounced the satirical movie Thank You for Smoking, Thiel teamed up with 2 other PayPal alums, Ken Howry and Luke Nosik, to form the Founders Fund, which invested mainly in internet startups. Thiel was, he says, categorically skeptical about clean tech, so the fund had not invested in Tesla. Nosik, who had become close to Musk, suggested that they invest in SpaceX. Thiel agreed to a conference call with Musk to discuss the idea. At one point, I asked Elon whether we could speak to the company's chief rocket engineer. Thiel says, and Elon replied, "You're speaking to him right now." That did not reassure Thiel, but Nosik pushed hard to make the investment. I argued that what Elon was trying to do was amazing, and we should be part of it, he says. Eventually, Thiel relented and agreed that the fund could put in $20 million. Part of my thinking was that it would be way to patch things up from the PayPal saga, he says. The investment was announced on August 3rd, 2008, just after the launch attempt failed. It served as a lifeline that allowed Musk to declare that he was going to fund a 4th launch. It was an interesting exercise in karma, Musk says. After I got assassinated by PayPal coup leaders, like Caesar being stabbed in the Senate, I could have said, "You guys, you suck," but I didn't. If I'd done that, Founders Fund wouldn't have come through in 2008, and SpaceX would be dead. I'm not into astrology or shit like that, but karma may be real. Crunch time. Musk had joined his team right after the 3rd failed launch flight in August of 2008. With his deadline of getting a new rocket to Kauai in 6 weeks, that seemed like a Musk reality distortion ploy. It had taken them 12 months between the 1st and 2nd failed launches, and another 17 months between the 2nd and the 3rd. But because the rocket did not need any fundamental design changes to correct the problems that caused the 3rd failure, he calculated that a 6-week deadline was doable and would energize his team. Also, given his rapid cash burn, he had no other choice. SpaceX had components for that 4th rocket in its Los Angeles factory, but shipping it by sea to Kauai would take 4 weeks. Tim Booza, SpaceX launch director, told Musk that the only way to meet his deadline would be to charter a C-17 transport plane from the Air Force. "Well, then just do it," Musk replied. That's when Booza knew that Musk was willing to put all of his chips on the table. 20 SpaceX employees rode with the rocket in the hold of the C-17, strapped into jump seats along the wall. The mood was festive. The work-crazed crew members were about to pull off, they thought, a hardcore miracle. As they flew over the Pacific, a young engineer named Trip Harris pulled out a guitar and started playing. His parents were music professors from Tennessee, and he had trained to become a classical musician. But one Christmas, he was watching Star Trek and decided that he wanted to be a rocket scientist instead. I ended up figuring out how to change my brain from doing music to doing engineering, which was not as much of a transition as he thought. After a year at Purdue, he was scrambling for a summer internship. But kept bombing interviews. He had reassigned himself to working at a local Ace Hardware when his professor got a call from a friend at SpaceX saying it needed interns. Without waiting for any paperwork, Harris got into his car the next morning, left his girlfriend behind, and drove from Indiana to Los Angeles. As they started to descend for refueling in Hawaii, there was a loud popping sound, and another. We're looking at each other, like, this seems weird. Harris says, but then we get another bang and we saw the side of the rocket tank crumbling like a Coca-Cola can. The rapid descent of the plane caused the pressure in the hold to increase and the valves of the tank weren't letting in air fast enough to allow the pressure inside to equalize. There was a mad scramble as the engineers pulled out their pocket knives and began cutting away the shrink wrapping and trying to open the valves. Bulent Alton ran to the cockpit to try to stop the descent. Here's this big, tertious guy screaming at the Air Force pilots, who were the whitest Americans you've ever seen, to go back higher. Harris says, astonishingly, they did not dump the rocket or Alton into the ocean. Instead, they agreed to ascend, but warned Alton that they only had 30 minutes of fuel. That meant in 10 minutes they would need to start descending again. One of the engineers climbed inside the dark area between the rocket's first and second stage, found the large pressurization line, and managed to twist it open, allowing air to rush into the rocket and equalize the pressure as the cargo plane again started to descend. The metal began popping back close to its original shape, but the damage had been done. The exterior was dented, and one of the slosh baffles had been dislodged. They called Musk in Los Angeles to tell him what happened and suggest that they bring the rocket back. All of us standing there could just hear this pause, says Harris. He's silent for a minute. Then he's like, no, you're going to get it to Kauai and fix it there. Harris recalls that when they got to Kauai, their first reaction was, man, we're doomed. Excuse me. Oh, okay. But after a day, the excitement kicked in. We began telling ourselves, we're going to make this work. Booza and the chief of rocket structures, Chris Tomlinson, wrestled up the equipment they needed at SpaceX headquarters, including new baffles to prevent slosh in the tanks, and loaded it into Musk Jet for the trip from Los Angeles to Kauai. There they found a hive of engineers scurrying around in the middle of the night, working frantically in the stripped rocket as if they were doctors in an emergency room trying to save a patient. After SpaceX's first 3 failures, Musk had imposed more quality controls and risk reduction procedures. So we were now used to moving a little bit slower with more documentation and checks, Booza says. He told Musk that if they followed all these new requirements, it would take 5 weeks to repair the rocket. If they jettisoned the requirements, they could do it in 5 days. Musk made the expected decision. Okay, he said. Go as fast as you can. Musk's decision to reverse his orders about quality controls taught Booza 2 things. Musk could pivot when situations change, and he was willing to take more risks than anyone. This is something that we had to learn. Which was that Elon would make a statement, but then time would go on and he would realize, oh no, actually we can do it the other way, Booza says. As they scrambled in the brutal Kauai sun, they were watched by an enormously large coconut crab that was close to 3 feet long. They named it Elon, and under its gaze, they were able to complete the repairs in the allotted 5 days. It was unlike anything that bloated companies in the aerospace industries could possibly have imagined, Booza says. Sometimes his insane deadlines make sense. 4th time's a charm. Unless the 4th rocket attempt succeeded, it would be the end of SpaceX and probably of the wacky notion that space pioneering would be led by private entrepreneurs. It might also be the end of Tesla. We wouldn't be able to get any new funding for Tesla, Musk says. People would be like, look at that guy whose rocket company failed. He's a loser. The launch was scheduled for September 28, 2008, and Musk planned to watch it from the command van at SpaceX headquarters in Los Angeles. To relieve tension, Kimball suggested that they take their kids to Disneyland that morning. It was a crowded Sunday, and they had arranged for VIP access. But waiting in the long lines was a blessing because it had a calming effect on Elon. Fittingly, they rode the Space Mountain roller coaster, which was such an obvious metaphor that it would seem Try it were it not true. Dressed in a beige polo shirt and faded jeans he had worn to Disneyland, Musk arrived at the command van just as the launch window was opening at 4 p.m. On one of the monitors, he could see the Falcon 1 on the Kauai launch pad. There was silence in the control room as a woman's voice intoned the countdown. When the rocket cleared the tower, the cheering began, but Musk stared silently at the data streaming into his computer and at the monitor on the wall, showing video from the rocket's cameras. After 60 seconds, the video showed the plum from the engineer darkening. This was fine. It was because the rocket had reached more rarefied air with less oxygen. The islets of Kualian atoll receded, looking like a strand of pearls in the turquoise sea. After 2 minutes, it was time for the stages to separate. The booster engine shut down, and this time there was a 5-second delay before the second stage was unleashed to prevent the bumping that had doomed the third launch. When the second stage slowly pulled away, Musk finally allowed himself to let out a whoop of joy. The carousel engine on the second stage performed perfectly. Its nozzle glowed a dull red from the heat, but Musk knew the material could get white hot and survive. Finally, 9 minutes after liftoff, the carousel engine cut off as planned, and its payload was released into orbit. By now, the cheers were deafening, and Musk was pumping his airs into the air. Kimball stared next to him, started to cry. Falcon 1 had made history as the first privately built rocket to launch from the ground and reach orbit. Musk and his small crew of just 500 employees, Boolean's comparing division had 50,000, had designed the system from the ground up and done all the constructions on its own. Little had been outsourced, and the funding had also been private, largely out of Musk's pocket. SpaceX had contracts to perform missions for NASA and other clients, but they would only get paid. But they get paid only if and when they succeeded. There were no subsidies or cost-plus contracts. That was freaking awesome, Musk yelled as he walked into the factory floor. He did a little jig in front of cheering employees gathered near the canteen. 4 times the charm. As the cheers rose again, he began stuttering a bit more than usual. My mind is kind of frazzled. It's hard for me to say anything, he murmured. But then he pronounced his vision for the future. This is just the first step of many. We're going to get Falcon 9 to orbit next year, get the Dragon spacecraft going, and take over the space shuttle. We're going to do a lot of things, even getting to Mars. Despite his stony appearance, Musk's stomach had been wrenched during the lunch, almost to the point of throwing up. Even after his success, he had trouble feeling joy. My cortisol levels, my stress hormones, the adrenaline, they were just too high that it was hard for me to feel happy, he says. There was a sense of relief, like being spared from death, but no joy. I was too stressful for that. It was way too stressful for that. I love NASA. Oh, I love NASA. The successful launch saved the future of entrepreneurial space endeavors. Like Roger Bannister besting the 4-minute mile, SpaceX made people recalibrate their sense of limitation when it came to getting to space, wrote the author Ashley Vance. What led to the major change in direction from NASA, the impending end of its space shuttle program, meant that the U.S. would no longer have any capacity to send crews or cargo to the International Space Station, so the agency announced a competition for a contractor to fly cargo missions there. The success of the fourth Falcon 1 flight allowed Musk and Gwynne Shotwell to fly to Houston in late 2008 to meet with NASA and push their case. When they got off the jet, Musk pulled her aside for a chat on tarmac. NASA is worried that I have to split my time between SpaceX and Tesla, he told her. I kind of need a partner. It was not an idea that came easily to him. He was better at commanding than partner. But he made her an offer. Do you want to be president of SpaceX? He would remain the CEO and they would divide responsibilities. I'll focus on engineering and product development, he said. And I want you to focus on customer management, human resources, government affairs, and a lot of the finances. She accepted right away. I love working with people, and he loves working with hardware and design, she explains. On December 22nd, as if to ring down the curtain on the horrible year of 2008. Musk got a call on his cell phone. NASA spaceflight chief Grenstermer would later end up at SpaceX gave him the news. SpaceX was going to be awarded 1.6 billion be awarded a 1.6 billion contract to make 12 round trips to space station. I love NASA, Musk responded. You guys rock. Then he changed his password for his computer login to I love NASA. Chapter 31, Saving Tesla, December 2008. Tesla financing, December 2008. Musk could not savor the NASA contract for more than a few minutes. In fact, his stress level didn't abate at all. SpaceX may have gotten a Christmas reprieve, but Tesla was still careening toward bankruptcy at the end of 2008. It was due to run out of money on Christmas Eve. Neither the company nor Musk personally had enough in the bank to make the next payroll. Musk enlisted his existing investors to fund a new equity round of a mere $20 million. It would be just enough to enable Tesla to sputter forward for a few more months. But when he thought the plan was wrapped up, he discovered that one investor was balking. Vantage Point Capital, led by Alan Salzman. And in order for the new equity to be issued, all the existing investors had to approve. Salzman and Musk had spent the past few months disagreeing on strategy, and at one point they got into shouting match at Tesla's headquarters, which could be overheard by employees. Salzman wanted Tesla to become a supplier of battery packs to other car companies such as Chrysler. It would help fund Tesla's growth, Salzman said. Musk thought it was nuts. Salzman was trying to insist that we hitch our wagon to a legacy car company, he says, and I'm like, that ship is literally sinking. Salzman was upset that Tesla was burning through the deposits made by roadster companies, even though the cars had not been built. People thought they put money down on a deposit, not on an unsecured loan to fund the company. Morally, it was wrong. Musk was able to get outside counsel to provide an opinion that it was legal. Salzman, who was repelled by Musk's behavior, he was tough on people and needlessly insensitive. That was just part of his DNA. It didn't sit well with me. On one unofficial board call with Kimball listening in, Salzman tried to lay the ground for removing Musk as CEO. I was furious at what these evil fools were trying to do to Elon Musk, Kimball says. I started yelling, no way you're not doing this. You guys are fools. Antonio Gracias was also on the call. Nope, we've got Elon's back, he said. Kimball called his brother, who was able to block a board vote. He was in such a trance-like focus that he didn't even get angry. Salzman and his partners insisted that Musk come to their office and detail Tesla's capital needs going forward. He was trying to perform open heart surgery, and we were trying to make sure that he wasn't putting in the wrong blood type, Salzman says. When you have one person with inordinate control and that person is under a lot of stress, that's a dicey situation. Musk got angry. We've got to do this right away or we'll miss payroll, he told Salzman. But Salzman insisted that they meet the following week. He also set the time for 7 a.m. Further enraging Musk, I'm a night owl. I'm like, oh man, this is fucked, he says. Salzman was doing this to me because he is a dickhead. Musk felt that Salzman relished this chance to look him in the eye and say no, which is what happened. Musk can be forgiving, as he showed by his reclamation with his PayPal partners, but there are a few people who caught him to go ballistic, almost internationally so. Martin Eberhard is one, and Alan Salzman became another. Musk thought he was intentionally trying to push Tesla into bankruptcy. He's such a douche, Musk says. When I say he's a douchebag, that is a descriptive, not a pejorative. Salzman calmly denies Musk's allegations and seems sanguine about his insult. When we did not have any scheme to take over the company or force it into bankruptcy, he says, that's absurd. One role is simply to support a company and make sure its capital is spent wisely. Despite Musk's personal attacks on him, he actually expresses some admiration. He has been a singular driving force behind the company, and I'll give him credit that it worked out. I doff my hat. In order to get around Salzman's veto on a new equity round, Musk scrambled to reconstruct the financing so that it did not involve issuing more equity, but instead taking on more debt. The make-or-break conference call came on Christmas Eve. 2 days after SpaceX was awarded its NASA contract. Musk was at Kimball's house in Boulder, Colorado, along with Tallulah Riley. I was on the floor wrapping presents for the kids, and Elon was on the bed on the phone, frantically trying to sort this thing out, she recalls. Christmas for me is very important, so my priority was to buffer the kids from the situation. I kept saying, it's Christmas, there'll be some sort of miracle, and there was. Vantage Point ended up supporting the plan, as did the other investors on the call. Musk broke down in tears. Had it gone any other way, Tesla would have been dead, he says, and maybe too the dream of electric cars for many years. At the time, all the major U.S. car companies had quit making electric vehicles. Government loans and a disclaimer investment. Over the years, one criticism of Tesla had been that the company was bailed out or subsidized by the government in 2009. In fact, Tesla did not get money from the Treasury's Department Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, commonly known as the bailout. Under that program, the government lent $18.4 billion to General Motors and Chrysler as they went through bankruptcy reconstructing. Tesla did not apply for any TARP or stimulus package money. What Tesla did get in June 2009 was $465 million in interest-bearing loans from the Department of Energy program. The Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loaning Program lent money to companies to make electric or fuel-efficient cars. Ford, Nissan, and Fisker Automotive also got loans. The Energy Department's loan to Tesla was not immediately infusion of cash. Unlike the bailout money to GM and Chrysler, the loan money was actually tied to actual expenses. We had to spend money and then submit invoices to the government, Musk explains. So the first check did not come until early 2010, 3 years later. Tesla repaid its loan along with $12 million interest. Nissan repaid in 2017. Fisker went bankrupt, and as of 2023, Ford still owed the money. A more significant infusion for Tesla came from Daimler. In October 2008, amid Tesla's crisis and SpaceX launch failures, Musk flew to the German company's Stuttgart headquarters. The Daimler executives told him that they were interested in creating an electric car, and they had a team that was planning to visit the U.S. in January 2009. They invented Tesla to show them a proposal for electric version of Daimler's smart car. Upon his return, Musk told J.B. Straubel that they should scramble to put together an electric sport car prototype. By the time Daimler team arrived, they dispatched an employee to Mexico, where gasoline-powered smart cars were available, to buy one and drive to California. Then they put a roadster electric motor and battery pack in it. When the Daimler executives arrived at Tesla in January 2009, they seemed annoyed that they'd never scheduled to meet with a small and cash-strapped company that they had barely heard of. I remember them being very grumpy and wanting to get out of there as soon as possible, Musk says. They were expecting some lame PowerPoint presentation. Then Musk asked them if they wanted to drive the car. What do you mean? One of the Daimler team asked. Musk explained that they had created a working model. They went to the parking lot, and the Daimler executives took a test drive. The car bolted in an instant and reached 60 miles per hour in about 4 seconds. It blew them away. That smart car hauled ass, Musk says. You could do wheelies in that car. As a result, Daimler contracted with Tesla for battery packs and power trains for smart cars, an idea not so different from the one Salzman had suggested. Musk asked Daimler also to consider investing in the company. In May 2009, even the Department of Energy loans were approved. Daimler agreed to take a $50 million equity stake in Tesla. If Daimler had not invested in Tesla at that time, we would have died, Musk says.